Good day, everyone. Very happy to be here. My name is Ernie Loutitt. I'm a Anishinaabe Cree, originally from Northern Ontario. For those of you new to Canada, Canada is a huge country, and we're filming this in Saskatoon, so it's about 2,000 miles from where I was born and raised. I was a soldier for 8 years. I joined the Canadian Forces when I was 17. I spent 5 years in the infantry. For anybody that's got a military background, and then a couple of years in the military police before I joined the Saskatoon City Police here in the province of Saskatchewan. I served there for 27 years, and I've been retired for coming on 7 years. Now I'm a writer and a public speaker, and I'm so honored to be part of anything that the Open Door Society is presenting.
But to get right to it, there's so much going on in the world right now. And if 2020 will be remembered for anything, it'll probably be COVID, of course, and all of the activism around race. And I was just wondering, all of the videos and images we see in the media and on social media, what is it that the public doesn't see? What would you say those videos don't capture?
Well, the first thing is the whole story, and usually it's much more complex than the 13 or 15 seconds or even 5 minutes of video that you'll see. Most interactions with police are police reactions. They've been called. They don't just appear for the most part. So a lot of times it's a reaction to a call for service, whatever it is, whatever the case may be, domestic violence, intoxication, and so when you see the arrests on video, and some of them are awful when you look at them, and they present a terrible picture, but it's not the everyday reality of policing. And I'm not gonna talk a whole lot about the United States, because the United States is a totally different ballgame. But in Canada, for new Canadians, I think you need to realize that you've come to the safest country in the world, and one of the best police countries in the world. The police are well trained, they're well paid, so the chances of corruption are very low. You also have the freedoms to film police when they're doing their jobs. Over the years, the prominence of videos have changed the way police do their job as well, because you're always in the spotlight every minute, every day. And so in all my 27 years I worked as a police officer, that I was always conscious of that you were always in the public eye, always. Every day, even when you're off duty, because people know you're a policeman, right? So I guess I would ask new Canadians not to get their impressions of police and policing authority in Canada from the media or the news from the United States.
Yeah, thanks so much. So still on the subject of authority and the manner sometimes that authority is asserted or carried out. I was just wondering, with everything going on in the world right now, even in Canada, I agree with you on the point of not comparing Canada to what's going on in the United States, right? No matter how close we are in terms of like geography and all that, maybe it's a different world out there. But we cannot run away from the fact that a lot of what happens there can somehow reflect or influence what goes on here. So in the last couple of months, we've seen protests even here in Canada, and I think that they're becoming even more widespread, and a lot of people joining in to speak about race relations and the manner in which that conversation is going on now is manifested in protest, right? So my question would be, what would make this protest stop?
You know what? I don't know if it needs to stop. Actually, protest is one of the fundamental freedoms that we have in this country, where you're free to voice your opinion and to protest. And protest brings change. It's the manner of protest that becomes the issue, especially for police officers and people in authority. When you cross the line and become lawless or vandalize or then of course it becomes an issue for everybody else, I guess. But protest, I mean, even here in Saskatoon, like when I first came to Saskatchewan in 1987, there was a lot of racism. There just was. Because people were so used to having things their own way, the people that had been here for the longest time. And Indigenous people were coming to the city, but were marginalized and ended up in the poorer parts of Saskatoon. Employment wasn't good. I remember when I first came here, because when I was in the Army, everything was based on ability. Everything was based on merit, right? So if you were a good soldier, you could do your job. It didn't matter what your background was, right? And some people might call you chief, like as an but that was just part of the whole thing. So I got that impression that as long as you did a good job and you were a productive person, that you would not encounter racism, right? That was my impression from the Army. I encountered racism when I was a kid in Northern Ontario, but when I came to Saskatoon, there was some very overt racism, and we went through a whole lot of things in this province of Saskatchewan, including Neil Stonechild Quarry, where positive changes came, but they just take time. And what I'm seeing now is people are demanding immediate change, not realizing that their protests are causing gradual changes.
Thanks again, Ernie. Your intro, your bio was kind of edited. You took out a lot of things, interesting things about you I read from your book and online. One of them will be that when you joined the police force in the city, you were probably the third
Yes.
Indigenous police officer. Could you tell us about that experience? And did you feel like you had to prove yourself, like work extra, twice as hard or 3 times as hard as your other colleagues because of that fact?
Yeah, when I first came to Saskatoon, I didn't, like I said, come out of the Army, so I just thought that I'm just going to be one of the guys, right? I'm going to be one of the police, and that's the way you accept you. Once you start doing your job, they're going to say, "Oh, this guy does his job good," but it mattered to a lot of people, and there was a lot of challenges. There was the police service in Saskatoon in '87 was predominantly white males. There was about 10 women. There was one African Canadian. There was one Orient Chinese Canadian, right? And what I would do is when I didn't have a call, I would just get out of my car and I would walk around, right? And people would look at you and, what's this guy doing walking around here in the middle of the high crime areas? But I just wanted people to get to know me and breaking down barriers and I think in some ways of that incremental change I was talking about, that's what occurred. People would see you, and people. I actually got a nickname when I was working on the streets, and it came from the people who have no filters, and it's children, right? And I would get out in my car and I'd walk around in some of the rougher and poorer neighborhoods. I don't like to call them that because that's where people live, but that's where I'd walk around. And there's always one kid, right? That's brave. So you'd see him, and he'd be walking around behind you. You know he wanted to talk to you, but he wouldn't come up. He would just walk. Eh? So you'd get in your car, and he'd take off when you look at him, and you get in your car and you leave. You come back the next day, and then there's that kid again, but now he's got a friend, right? And they're following you, and eventually the brave one comes up and says, what are you doing? I said, I'm working. Why are you walking around here? And I said, well, because I work here, right? And these were Indigenous children, and they'd never seen an Indigenous police officer walking around their neighborhood before, so it was breaking down barriers. And then finally, you know, the brave kid would have 4 or 5 kids with him, and then he'd, you know, what's your name? And it's Ernie. Are you an Indian? Yes. And then everybody started calling me Indian Ernie. And that name stuck with me through my whole career, and I actually used it in the title of my books.
The title of your book,
yeah. But that's where it came up. And then eventually, everybody started calling me that. Bad guys would call me that. They'd usually call me other things too. But you just became an identifiable person, and you broke down barriers. They say it's almost discriminatory hiring. We need to have this many people of this many visible minorities, but it's not. And the way I can compare it is towards the end of my career, it's like, say you have a dozen eggs, and they're all white, and you put one brown one every third one, right? Right? And the brown one tells the white one how things are for him, and the white one tells the brown one. You know what I mean? So it's like insulators, right? And the more you do that with a police service, the more representative that police service becomes of a community. So that the more people from visible minorities and immigrants, because there's a natural suspicion for a lot of people from different places in the world about the police, but it's getting them to engage in policing. I remember towards the end of my career, we were hiring so many people and so many diverse cultures that I was learning all the time. All the time. Guys would say, well, this is how we do this, and this is why we do this. And there's the one guy from, he was from India, but I don't know which part of India he was from. But he did something culturally that was very appropriate, but for an employer, it wasn't. His father was sick, so he went to India without telling anybody and never showed up for work. Right? So, and you know, and as the senior management, I'm sure that they were trying to get their head around it, but for him it was perfectly natural. So I learned that if you know from him that family comes before everything, right? And if you can have empathy with somebody, and they can identify you by your name, and you can identify them by their name, you break down so many barriers. And there's a lot less likelihood of negative, violent encounters, even if a person's committing a crime, if they know who you are and you know who they are. Right? Do you know what I mean? Like, so by the police officer by name, right? So when I was out there, a lot of times, just the fact that people knew my name, and sometimes just by reputation. Even though they didn't truly know you, but they knew of you. It saved so many negative encounters. If you take the time to learn the people you're dealing with, who they are, where they're from, what their experiences are, and there's times like, or you know, you're so busy with your life and your family and all the things that you do, that you sometimes miss doing that. But I'll give a good example. My last year of policing. They had there's an old police station. They've built a new one here in Saskatoon now, but they put a Tim Hortons, as a donut shop, right beside the police station. Right, so you just walked out of the police station, and you were at Tim Hortons. So everybody thought that was a big laugh. But most of the employees there were temporary foreign workers, right? And I'd watch people when I was getting my coffee, and I'd watch how they treated them, and sometimes abruptly, sometimes rude, you know, and just, you know, I'll take double, whatever, coffee, and it just kind of struck me. So, and they all were in their 30s, probably, maybe late 20s, early 30s. So the one night when it was quiet, I went over and I asked the lady who was making my coffee, and I says, "What did you do before you came to Canada?" And she was a pharmacist. So then I asked the other guy behind the counter what he did. He was an engineer. So they were doing their time, working at Tim Hortons, to satisfy the residency requirement. But every one of them was better educated than I was. It was amazing. And then, so I went back. I was very humbled by that. I went back, and the next night on parade, when police officers, when they're coming to work, they form up and you read who's wanted and what's going on and stuff like that. So I looked at everybody and I said, how many guys go to Tim Hortons? Guys, I always say guys. It was guys and girls. We were pretty reflective shift. And I was next door and they said, everybody did, right? I said, next time you go in there, I said, I want you to know that the person serving you is a pharmacist, a chemist, an engineer, right? And they all didn't just drop into Tim Hortons to serve you. They had a life before they got here. And they're going to have a better life once they're done working at Tim Hortons, right? I try to get people to realize that everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. You know, some people that are new to Canada come from some of the most violent conflict zones in the world, right? And have seen more trauma and know more about violence in the military and bad authority than anybody in Canada will ever know. And that person in Canada that gets all riled up because somebody says something to them, just take a minute and think about some of the people that come to this country and where they're from.
So every situation is different, and maybe it's about time the police saw that and learned to deal with every situation differently. And you know, it's not just the policy for policy's sake, but the policy somehow has to match with the reality, like you said in your book. And I think that it's on that note I would want to again thank you for sharing these moments with us, and sharing your experiences with us. I've learned a lot, and I hope that those watching have too.
Thank you. It's been an honor and privilege. Never stop learning, and then things just get better.